two versions of the same assignment. They're slightly different. If you're working ArcGIS Online, you're going to be mapping the impact of fishing on livelihoods in ports in New England. And then part 2 of that project will be to map offshore fishing patterns. If you choose QGIS to do the assignment, part 1 will be the same, where you're going to map the impact of fishing on livelihoods in those communities. And then part 2 will be different. Part 2 will be mapping the potential impacts of fishing closures on and how that would impact certain communities in New England. Hey everyone, well, it's been a crazy semester, and here we are almost at the end of the semester, and we do need to do a little bit more work just so we can reach those learning objectives that we want to do in this course. All right, so there's been a lot of interesting technical challenges that we've been dealing with this semester, and that's put a little bit of delays on some of the plans that I had for how this course would go. This is the first time that I've run this course, so it's a little bit of just trying everything out to make sure it's going to work in the right way. Okay, so because of we're getting late into the semester, there is still some pretty cool things that I think you can learn, and I want to make sure that you're able to learn that if you want to do it. So for this last assignment, for our last project, which has to do with fisheries and sustainable management of the environment, and also managing the environment in a way that it also benefits people, so that we don't just have to make a choice between either jobs or the environment, right? How do we do both in a way that's helpful to the environment and actually helps people's livelihoods? That's what this project gets at. So for this one, what we're looking at here is you have a choice. You can either do this in ArcGIS Online, or you can do it in a new software, QGIS. All right, the reason I'm giving you two choices is just because if you've had some technical challenges this semester with getting the software to work, or maybe your own computer just is starting to break, or it's just not easy to work with, maybe just go with the ArcGIS Online version of this assignment, just because that is an interface that you've had some practice with before, and your own computer isn't really a factor there, because ArcGIS Online just does everything in the online environment. So maybe you might think about choosing that one. The other option is doing the assignment in a software called QGIS, and for this you're actually going to download the software. Okay, so we're no longer using, in this project, there's no MyCSUN software, there's no Citrix, nothing like that, right? So we're just trying to avoid that for this assignment. So ArcGIS Online is online, right? You need a decent internet connection for this to work. But you're just going straight to their website. You're not going through the MyCSUN software interface, which I know has had some challenges for some students this semester. Okay, QGIS, you're going to need to download the software. And the great thing about QGIS is that it works on Windows or it works on Mac. So that's pretty cool, and it's going to live on your own computer. So there's no accessing MyCSUN software to have to do this. So if you feel like you can install software, it's completely free. Also, got to make sure you know that QGIS is free, and so if you can download the software and feel like you're okay with working with that and in the very basic installation way, maybe you want to try that, getting some extra skills with a new software. All right, the original plan for this project was to do it in QGIS because QGIS represents a form of software commons. QGIS is a free and open source software, but in the way that we've been talking about some materials for this assignment is we can also call this a commons, because it's a shared resource. It's shared by a group of people around the world who create the software and manage it, and so we can think about this like a commons. So I thought it was a good software to bring in to use for this project. And a lot of institutions, a lot of organizations all around the world actually use QGIS because it doesn't come with all of the financial constraints, right? Basically, it's not a giant expensive software package. So for example, I've worked with I've worked with the GIS user community in the country of Vanuatu, in their national government. So anybody in the federal government who's using GIS, they're using QGIS just because they have a limited budget, and QGIS is openly available, and it is pretty powerful, and has a lot of functionality. So it is a pretty awesome and cool software to be able to learn how to use. And you'll see that it is a little bit different than an ArcMap interface, but the underlying GIS principles are the same. And when we learn a new software, it's just a matter of learning how those principles and fundamentals work in that particular interface. So in this assignment, we're going to be looking at fisheries management off the coast of New England. And whether you choose the ArcGIS Online version of the assignment or the QGIS version of the assignment, you're actually going to end up with turning in a story map for this assignment that has a little bit of your writing, and you're going to put some of your maps in it. So the story map is going to be the same way that you turn in regardless of how you do the assignment. That's just your format for submitting. And so the project is about communities fisheries management in New England, and we're drawing on those lessons that I've posted on Canvas about sustainable ways of doing business and how different forms of business can have different kinds of impacts on people's livelihoods and on the environment, and the ways that we think about resources like commons and how commons are managed. All right, so I'll just jump straight to it. So if you do the ArcGIS Online version of the assignment, you're going to be making a couple different maps here. One of these maps is looking at fishing patterns that are related to ports in the New England states of Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. And here's one of the maps that you'll make is the impact that fishing has on ports in these states. So this isn't, you're not looking at all of the data that you start out with. The data that you start out with actually has a lot of points, thousands of points that are out here across the ocean, which represent fishing trips, commercial fishing trips. And the background for this project is that a lot of fisheries management uses a lot of geospatial GIS technologies, mainly interested in finding out how much fish are caught, where those fish are caught, and where they should be closing or putting fishing bans and fishing closures and things like that. But there hasn't been that much work to understand how all of this impacts people's livelihoods at the same time. So we can also use GIS to understand how the fishing industry impacts people's livelihoods. So what you're looking at here in this map is the orange graduated symbols are the ports, or a selection of ports, and those represent how many fish were caught. This was from our data, which comes from the year 2004. That's our data set. So the orange represents the number of fish that are caught that on individual fishing boats that just brought them back to that port. So this is the impact of the ocean on these ports in terms of the fish caught. But there's another variable here that you're actually going to calculate on your own through the GIS software called fisherman days. And that has to do with how much do people work? How people from each one of these ports, from each one of these communities, how much work? If we can understand that in terms of how much do these communities depend on the ocean. So a fisherman day, that's a calculation of the number of crew members on a boat times the number of days of the trip. So it's like a cumulative number that represents how many, how much work is being done related to that community. And just looking at this map, you can see that the number of fish caught is not the same as the amount of work that goes in. So some of these ports really depend a lot on the ocean in terms of how many people and how much time actually gets spent out at sea, whereas some of the ports catch more or less fish. So that's an interesting and useful variable to understand the human impacts, not just on the ocean itself, but how does the fishing impact those communities and how much work goes into that fishing. So you're going to do that, and then we've got another map that you're going to make in ArcGIS Online, which shows offshore fishing patterns of different fishing communities. So this is a type of map you can put into a story map called a swipe map, and this is actually made up of 2 web maps. So on the left side, this shows the fisherman days at sea of boat crews from the port of Gloucester, Massachusetts. And if you swipe it this way, this shows the fisherman days at sea for the community of New Bedford, Massachusetts. And we see that there's different spatial patterns here, and we can think about this in different ways. And it's important that we can compare Gloucester and New Bedford also in terms of the amount of fish they caught. And that's not the same as the amount of work that they do, or how much these communities depend on the ocean. So this is what you'll be doing here is creating individual web maps on your own, and then you'll end up embedding them into the story map so that you can also have a write-up which draws on that background reading that you've been doing. All right, switching over to QGIS, if you're going to take up the QGIS version of the assignment, the first part is going to be the same as in the ArcGIS Online assignment, where you're going to be looking at ports and the impact of all of those fishing trips on the port communities. So here I am in the QGIS interface, and this is just all of those points here. That is some of your baseline data that you'll be working with that you're not actually going to display in your final maps, because look, it's just too confusing, right? And part of using GIS is trying to make it easier to understand a large data set. So we're going to look at all of these fishing trips. These are commercial fishing trips represented by those points. What we want to do is, just like in the ArcGIS version of the assignment, we want to figure out how much do each one of these ports depend on the sea to support livelihoods in their community. So here's the same data is being represented here, which is the number of fisherman days that each port puts into doing its work. And you can compare that with the total number of fish caught, which is a little bit different. And so you're going to be working in QGIS, and you can export this as a map image, and then embed that image into your story map that you turn in. So it won't be an interactive map, it will just be an image that you put in, but that's just because you're working in QGIS to do this. The second part of the QGIS assignment is going to be different than part 2 of the ArcGIS Online assignment. So instead of mapping those offshore fishing patterns, what you'll be doing is looking at the potential impacts of a fishing closure. And so you're going to be working with a national marine sanctuary border here, and we're going to be trying to estimate which communities would be most affected if fishing was closed to a certain area. And so for this one, you're going to be doing some geoprocessing and looking at a way to create a new layer where it shows ports. And what you see here are the graduated symbols here. That represents the percent of work, the percent of fisherman days that is done in this National Marine Sanctuary. And so that represents the communities that would be most significantly impacted by the banning of fishing in this place. And so we can do something like this in QGIS. It's not really possible to do it very easily in ArcGIS Online. That's why we'll do it this way in QGIS. All right, so there's more details in the tutorial videos for each one of these 2 assignments that I'll post separately. This video is just to introduce the project so you can help decide which one you might want to do.